Hi there, I'm Keeva Stratton, and today on Culture Snap, we've got a guest I happen to know very well, author and former AFL player Brandon Jack. Brandon spent 5 years as an AFL player for the Sydney Swans before discovering his true calling as a writer. When his time in footy was done, I had the pleasure of having Brandon work for me as a copywriter at Quip Brands. During that time, he was quickly building a portfolio of opinion pieces for major publications. His critically acclaimed memoir, 28, unpacked his coming-of-age story, growing up in a home where your dad is a rugby legend and your older brother's legend status in the AFL was rapidly on the rise. In July of this year, Brandon released his first fiction novel, Pissants, a wickedly humorous and deeply empathetic look inside the locker room of a totally fictitious AFL club, told through the voices of some pretty colourful fringe players. In Pissants, we finally get a taste of Brandon's true creative talents, where he's not just found his voice, but brings to life many, as we're taken on a visceral ride inside the often outrageous and outrageously funny stories of the young men on the bench. I hope you enjoy. Brandon Jack, welcome to Culture Snap.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you because obviously you and I have known each other for some time and I've kind of watched your journey from afar, and perhaps the most exciting chapter, I think, is just being written as we speak. You've recently released your first fiction novel called Pissants. And I'm going to start by apologising to anyone who's not in Australia, because we are going to talk a lot about Australian rules football today. And anyone with a sensitivity to language, I would say, my mother should perhaps not be listening to this episode because there may be a few colourful words that come out. But Brandon, tell us, what is this story about? What is Pissants? Where's it come from? What's it based on?
Thanks for the language warning, Keeva. I think that's always important. All these podcasts and events, I always have to make sure if I'm allowed to swear on them. Where has Pissants come from? That's a great question. Obviously, like you said, you've watched me for a while now, Keeva, and for context of people listening, watching, you were the first person to give me a writing job. You were the first person to give me an opportunity to write for money. And we did some, I'm sure we'll touch on this later, but I did a lot of copywriting work with you over the years, which helped me learn how to write characters, I think. I think I learned how to write voices. And as such, my fictional writing has become very voice-based. And Pissants is a novel that, on the surface, you can say it's just a bunch of voices that are quite dark and humorous and engaging. And I think that's enough to grip some people in. It's about a group of degenerate young football players who are searching for something more than their life can probably give them at that point in time. And as such, they engage in these very raucous, debaucherous activities, behaviors, weekly rituals with one another, loosely based on my experiences as a football player. But Pissants is, it's about that group, I think, at its core, of young men trying to find their way and not really having the tools to do so.
I was reading about the author in Pissants, and I feel like I need to read this to you because it's not particularly long. It says, Brandon Jack is a Sydney-based writer who played for the Sydney Swans for 5 years. He's the author of the acclaimed memoir 28. Do you think you could have given us a little bit more about who you are in the About the Author, Brandon?
No, those things are always a joke, right? It's like, so-and-so is a Sydney-based author. And if you won awards, I know we list all your awards. And it's like, they have won, so many fellowships. I don't have any writing awards. And normally it's like, they are the author of 16 other novels. It's like, I've only got one other book to my name. It's an odd thing. I do have a discomfort this is odd because I've written a memoir, but I do have a discomfort or sometimes a sense of cringe about revealing too much about myself or trying to define who I am. I do struggle with that a lot. And it's odd that, I've written a memoir and I'm saying that, and this book is still very much, even though it's fiction, it's exploring parts of me. When it comes to writing bios like that, I'm always very short. I don't want to give away too much. Yeah, it's an odd thing that I have. I think a lot of writers have it. Maybe it's imposter syndrome deep down. Who knows?
Well, you've mentioned your memoir, which is 28, and that came out approximately 3 years ago when you were 28. And obviously the number also refers to the number of games that you played. I won't go into the memoir too much, but I did want to ask, now, a few years later, is there anything in the memoir that you regret sharing, or anything that you now look back on and go, oh, I really wouldn't want to read that chapter again?
Nothing that I regret sharing. I knew as soon as I wrote it that it would eventually become dated to me and that I would my views would change on things as I got older. I do talks at schools about 28 still. So earlier in the week, I was doing talks to a school in Perth online who study it for the year 12 English. And that's the only kind of time now I go back and have to read it and I have to flip through it. I don't actually own a copy. I have to borrow my best friends whenever I'm doing these talks. So I have to call up Dom, my best mate, and say, hey, can I borrow 28 again? Which is quite funny. I think the one thing I wish I had have done a bit differently is it did fall sometimes into the trope of a memoir is you have to kind of paint a struggle. You have to really paint a struggle. And a lot of times memoirs are just a person struggled a lot and then came out to the other side. And I think at times in 28, I did focus a lot on that. And maybe that's just where I was at that particular point in my life. I was still coming to terms with my footballing career and was very negative towards it. So it is a book that to me is written by someone in a very negative space. And as such, I think Pissants is now a far more humorous side of things. It would have been nice if Pissants had come first and then later in my life I could do the memoir and really go into my life and things. But the sappy tropes of it may be necessary to get to the point where I could now write with humor. So while I would do things differently now, I don't think you can regret them. Even the people I wrote about, the things I wrote about, I don't regret it because it was just what I felt I had to do at that point in time.
Yeah, and I love that it's being used by Year 12s in Perth. That's incredible. So, Pissants. What is a pissant? This is not a terminology that everyone's going to be familiar with. How would you describe a pissant?
Yeah. I mean, there's a few definitions of piss. I mean, it's one of those words where I think if you hear it, you kind of know what it means. It's meant to be used as a vulgar slang to somebody. It's like you're a pissant, somebody I hold contempt for. You're almost worthless is the definition online, I think. And I think Kurt Vonnegut is the only author I found who had definitions of pissant as well in his writing, or something similar. Or somebody, I think Vonnegut's was somebody who thinks they're so damn smart and can't shut their mouth, which is very much what some of the pissants in this book are. For me, in the book and in the footballing world, the pissant is, it's that person who is almost worthless at a football club because they don't provide value on the field. They are the reserve grade player who doesn't really have a home at a footy club. And I think at every club, I reckon there would be 5 or 6 pissants. And I say it as a term of endearment almost. I think it's a bonding term for the group. They view each other as pissants. It brings them together. But it is a term that's meant to be used as a person who is not where they would hope to be.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the book itself obviously focuses very much on the fringe player specifically and the ones that aren't necessarily getting the games in the first. But I think there's something about the kind of concept of a pissant is really just someone who's seeking belonging, right? Someone who's trying to fit in. And I don't know if that's necessarily just the players that maybe are not, in the core team.
Yeah, I'd hope that, I mean, both of my books so far have been very football based, and I hope that any writing I do about sport is understandable and enjoyed by people who don't get sport. I think that good writing gets to the core of a common human experience, and it just so happens that this takes place in the footballing world. And just I think we don't get many books set in sporting worlds, let alone footballing worlds. So there is a tendency of people to maybe get hung up on the novelty of a footballing book. But it's very much the reviews I've seen so far, and I don't read too many reviews, but my team will send me ones that they think I should read or that they think I'll like. The reviews I've seen so far that really seem to get it say that. They say this is a book about a group of young men finding their way. And that's what it is. It just so happens to be in a footballing world.
And so the book is kind of told from various characters' perspectives. So you've got these kind of multitude of voices that come throughout. I really love that because it's a bit of a roller coaster ride. You don't really know where you're going next in terms of whose perspective. I mean, the narrative moves, like you've got this kind of timeline narrative that's moving forward, but from chapter to chapter, it's almost like you don't really know whose head you're going to be in at one minute to another, which kind of is kind of interesting and exciting. But the question I've been dying to ask is actually about the typesetting. I love the typesetting. Where did that come from? The idea of
that is Irvin Welsh. Evan Walsh, the author of Trainspotting, he would be my all-time favorite author. And this book is, at some point, I was like, I just want to write the Australian Trainspotting, and I even experimented with Trainspotting is done in that kind of Scottish dialect. And I, for one brief moment, tried to write in an Australian, like an ochre kind of thing, and it doesn't work. The Australian accent just cannot be written out and be enjoyable. It's just cringy. Yeah, the typesetting was reading books that did it, and I like how that looks on a page. I think it's a book. A book is just almost like this thing that you just have to get somebody to go from one cover to the other, and you go into your toolkit and you use whatever's at your disposal to do that. For right now, I can't write sustained prose for 300 pages that somebody will just want to read that same level of prose from one character. So my method is voices and typesetting and WhatsApp chats and Facebook events. And I think a lot of modern literature should do more of that. I think, if Hemingway existed in a time where he knew what a WhatsApp group is, I don't know, I'd like to think he would be interesting enough to maybe look at doing that in the book. But yeah, it came out of necessity because I can't write straight prose for 300 pages, but it's also exciting. And I think the energy of the book required it. It required something that was different and unique, and knowing that other authors had done it helped me to know I could also then do it.
It is quite a unique feature, I think, of the book. I mean, yes, I have seen other books done with that kind of similar type of typesetting, but to me, it's almost a kind of exercise in design thinking, right? You've really got to think 3D, off the page, not just how the characters are telling you their story, but kind of the methodology through which that story is being best told based on the character. And yes, you've got WhatsApp group in there, but you've also got things like, you've got the instructions to, a game that's been made up for the players specifically. And so you've almost had to think through this entire kind of game structure.
Yeah.
And there's some where you've got interviews and the text doesn't necessarily, the body of text or the volume of text doesn't necessarily line up from column to column. So there's kind of this choose your own adventure as a reader. Do I stay on this one? Do I read across the page?
Yeah. That's interesting. That I think with some of the chapters, I wondered if what order they would read certain things in. At my core, I do have, I'm looking at a few books that are sitting in the corner over right now. They're just like graphic design books. And I've never studied graphic design, but I have a lot of books on like posters and typesetting, and I really enjoy. It's one of those things where you just have an interest in it. I don't know why. So being able to do that in a book, I was very grateful that my publisher didn't try and trim it down. I mean, I was fortunate where there was a way weirder version of this book. Even it's quite weird, but there was a lot in it in the first draft, which was almost like it is now, but on steroids. And that was me trying to show how smart I thought I could be. And it just didn't work. So I was very lucky that I had an editor who could come in and be like, you're pushing it too far in these points and it's unreadable. We don't want to sacrifice the story and the reading experience at the expense of you wanting to appear like you're some kind of genius. And that was so right. There was parts of it that just a reflection of that was unreadable. So we found a middle ground between experimentation with form and format and still having it serve the story, because everything still has to serve the story. It has to reveal a detail. It has to be a way to reveal something about the group. Otherwise, there's no point having it in. It can't just be there for fun.
So let's talk a little bit about the story. There's this kind of core group of Pissants, and they each are kind of marked by their nicknames and their characterizations. And they do tend to swing between moments of levity and moments of thuggishness and moments of kind of almost emotion. There's quite a journey that you go on, and a bit of a... It's kind of, to me, like a great kind of composition of music. It does kind of take you into different extremes and different places. Did you write it in the order that it kind of is, or did you write each character first? What was the process like?
I view it as an album. I think an album has a listing of songs, and a really well laid out album. If you listen to it start to finish, it has that. It knows the right moments to put the big hit in, or it knows when to give you the quiet, sad song. And Pissants it's a novel, but every chapter is almost its own self-contained short story. There's a slight plot that runs through it, but it's not a plot-centric novel. And when I was writing it, it came in. There was no order while writing it. I had an idea of where I wanted to start and end. I knew that the police academy chapter would be at the start. I knew the nicknames chapter would be at the start. And I knew that we would end with Fangs. The Fangs is, in my mind, the main narrator, but I knew it would end with Fangs having his final meeting with the club, because that gave me a very clear end point. Along the way, just certain voices come up, and then I'd wake up one day and want to write as Stick, or another day I'd want to write as Mud, or I'd want to write as Coach Mac, and I would keep that list on my computer and kind of know like how many chapters of each person I'd done and do loose arrangements and see how that would work. And there's a few different orders I had, but what I submitted in the end, the order was 95% the same. We might have moved one or two chapters, but it was very, very similar. And that was just, a lot of the chapters could be anywhere. There's no plot that really ties into a certain point, but it's more the emotion. If we felt there was too many fun chapters in a row, then we needed the emotional one. So we'd stick it in there.
And obviously, a lot of the source material comes from experience. So I'm sure that no character is any one person. I'm sure there are a combination of people or experiences or stories, perhaps your own stories, that kind of thing. Has anyone reached out and said, come on, Brandon, I can't believe you shared that. That was just between, our little group.
No. I've had a lot of guys message me saying it's funny, saying, oh, I remember that was funny. No, unless they're so angry that they haven't. But there's obviously I'm a writer who minds their life for experiences, and my life just happened to be somewhat in the public eye, I guess. Like people knew about the footy club, and those people in a footy club are like household names most of the time. Every character, like you said, I describe them as Frankensteins. It's like it might have started based on somebody, because in order for me to care about a character or to want to write a character, I have to care about them. And it's easier to care about them if I visualize them as somebody I know, if I start with them being somebody I know, and then you kind of change their backstory, or you add a certain trait from somebody else that makes them so not obviously that person to everyone else. But I feel like I know it, and the person who is based on would probably read it and be like, well, that really feels like me. But yeah, I think I write in a way where it always comes from a place of care. There's always a level of understanding for a person, and I don't like to write. I'd rather care about a character than just think they're a bad person.
You were at the Sydney Swans at the time of the famous no dickheads policy. So this was, an interesting time, line in the sand, no dickheads. But there seemed to be a lot of pissants. So what's the difference, I want to understand, between a dickhead and a pissant?
And there was no dickhead policy. This is like one of the great myths of footy world. There's no dickhead policy. It's in the same way that every other club is like, just no one wants a dickhead at their club. I don't know where that came from. There are pissants at every footy club, and there were pissants at the Swans when I was there, and I was around the pissants when I was there, and I was one of them for a period of time. I've done a lot of writing about the pedestal that we put football players on in society, and I think that we want them to be role models, yet they're not. But then whenever something comes out about them being, the kind of people that a lot of them are, we just kind of hide from it. Or even like with pissants, I think people will hide from this portrait of football players, which is probably a more realistic portrait than you would ever get from an Amazon docu-series about them. Like that's all going to be like manicured to appear in a certain way. It'll be put through the AFL PR machine, who want to look after their best interests. I'm not beholden to anyone with my writing. I don't have a job at the AFL. I don't have to please anyone. And I come from a point where I just like to paint a picture of what I think they're actually like. And if that costs me relationships in the AFL world as a result, or, with former teammates or the Swans, then so be it. I am a writer. I'm a writer first and foremost now, and my loyalty is to the writing. And there's a reason why I don't think the Swans will ever promote any of my books. And it kills me whenever I see another player release a memoir or autobiography and their club tweets about it, their old club tweets about it and gets lots of sales, because the Swans would never do that for my book, sadly. But I wish they would.
I think they might, if it was perhaps like if Paul Prose was still there, or some of those characters that have really come to appreciate, what kind of masculinity and younger masculinity, the struggles of that and the complexity of that is all about. I would say, though, you fall in love with these characters. So there's an awful lot of empathy for them. It's certainly not, you don't write them as vulgar, even though some of their actions could be perhaps framed that way. And I mean, there are some pretty heinous acts in the book, one about a dog in particular, which kind of hit me pretty hard. I had to put it down for a minute after reading that one. But, you know, you do fall in love with them by the end and you want the best for them. Like there's a lot of, and you've obviously imbued that empathy into the writing. That's not, you know, by chance or by mistake. So I was wondering actually when reading it, because having read your memoir, which I felt was pretty hard on you, Brandon. Like I agree with you. You went to a dark place and you wrote darkly about yourself and probably quite critically.
Yeah.
I wonder if this was almost you writing a bit of a love letter to your younger self.
Yeah, in a way, this is like I'd say Pissants is like multiple parts of my psyche to intellectualize it. I just like having a conversation. It's like the 20-year-old me, and then there's a character, Elliot, who I'd say is the mid-20s me, and a far different voice, and a voice that a lot of people have enjoyed, which I was surprised about, that a lot of people have really gravitated towards the Elliot voice. But it's in a way, it's my brain on the page. It's me trying to figure out my whole 20s, just being there and being like, at points I was a degenerate asshole, but at points I was a really sad, reflective person who didn't know what they were doing with their life. And I think that whiplash is a big part of why people are enjoying the book. I think I get a lot of messages from people saying they enjoy the roller coaster whiplash nature of it. Is this a love letter to football? I think it was showing that, for me, it was being like, this was funny. A lot of stuff that I did, which I went through a period in my life where I would have condemned it all and said, this is stupid stuff and there's no way football players should be doing this. I then came out the other side of that a bit with a renewed perspective, being like, no, this served a genuine purpose. You know, I think there was a level of boyish masculine humor that we used, which it's easy to shit can it and say we shouldn't be like that. But I know how devastatingly quiet it is if you remove that group from that, if you completely strip it from them and say you can't be like this. Because then it's like, well, what do I be like? I don't know any other way. And that was a bit of a reckoning for me. I think a love letter to football as much as a coming to terms with some more masculine behaviors of my 20s and not just trying to get rid of them, to try and understand them more.
You were on the fringe, obviously, as a player because you weren't playing, you know, in the top team every week. But you're also someone who's highly intelligent and, you know, probably could have, you know, instead of having a football career, could have gone immediately into your law degree or that which you know, kind of set out for yourself with the incredible ATAR that you got. Do you think that you felt a little bit like you had to meet characters where they are, or am I completely wrong? Is, you know, the football club just the home of intellectual society in Australia?
I think Fangs is probably the most interesting one to me, because Fangs is, I don't think there are many Fangs-like characters out there. I think that's maybe like one or two at a footy club, if that. But Fangs is the character who probably isn't stimulated enough by their environment. One, because he's not having the on-field success. But two, all of Fangs' chapters are just filled with these like pop culture references and movie quotes, and he's always referencing TV shows and things like that. This is a guy who has a really, I don't want to say high intelligence. There's a type of intelligence that he doesn't get satisfied through football. And my experience of footy clubs is, yeah, not to sound like a wanker here, but it can be very understimulating. It can be very monotonous and boring, and no one's ever talking about the books they're reading. Like, that doesn't happen in a footy club. You're more likely to go grab coffee for the fourth time in a day and discuss Bali trip from 2 years ago. Like, that's the sort of stuff that happens. I wanted to counterbalance that by then having like a Stick, for example. Stick is probably the most caricaturous. Stick and Coach Mac are the two most like a caricature of those two. They're quite zany. And at times writing them, I might have felt like I was going too far into fictional land and had to pull it back. So they have backstories which kind of tries to pull them back a little bit. But I wanted them to still feel real and like that they could exist at a footy club. So to me, yeah, all those characters could exist at a footy club.
So talk to me a little bit about yourself as a reader and then a writer, because I always feel like everyone's a reader first, right? Like no one starts off as a writer. When did you fall in love with reading, and like was there a book, was there something that really spurred that on?
If you want to be a writer, then you have to read a lot and you have to write a lot, and there's no escaping that. And no one, even if you have a natural ability to write, you still need to read to get ideas. It does something for me, right? I'm still not a great reader. Like I read a bit, but I know people who really don't read a lot more than I do. For me, it's when I find a book that does strike me that I will then finish really quickly. And I'd say there's been like 20 books in my life that I've read and been like, I literally put the book down at the end and go, wow, like that was something. Trainspotting, which I mentioned, was one. Raymond Carver's short stories were another, which I remember reading. And the first time I was like, wow, what is this? You gifted me Postcards from the Edge by Carrie Fisher, which was a very important book for me. Only the first section, I can't finish that book. I find it really hard after
Really?
after the diary entries. After the diary entry section, I kind of lose interest in that book. So I've read the first 100 pages of Postcards from the Edge like many, many times. I'm looking at the books off to my left here as I say this all. Who else? George Saunders is the latest one. George Saunders is the American short story writer. I've read every collection he's done over the past year. I'll shamelessly say Charles Bukowski's poetry was something I really loved in my early 20s, and there was just something about his writing that to my young male brain, it just worked. So for me, it's about finding authors and books that I love, but I still read stuff that I don't like and force my way through it. Yeah, I'd say that list is a pretty comprehensive list. And Bret Easton Ellis. Bret Easton Ellis and Chuck Palahniuk. I'll do all the 90s authors, the male 90s authors who were quite influential for me.
I was going to say, this is very Gen X, Brandon. I feel like you've just kind of, listed the most Gen X kind of reading list.
Yeah, I think, well, that's like musically as well. That's the stuff I like. Nirvana and Oasis were my like bands, and they're both mid-90s, were early 90s, mid-90s. And there's just something about, I don't know, I think there was like in the late 90s, there was the trio of like Irvin Welsh, Chuck Palahniuk, and Bret Easton Ellis is so linked that whenever you look up like masculine books or books for men, like they're the ones that come up. And I mean, they're all satires, like Trainspotting less, but American Psycho, Fight Club are clear satires that I think at the time people didn't take to be satire, and it created a lot of controversy as a result. But these are books that are written by, both authors, gay men, who I think were criticizing a society that they didn't feel like they belonged to. And that's almost what Pissants is in a way. I wrote Pissants feeling like an outsider who had at some point been on the inside, but I still am more of an outsider to that world. So there's something about that lens that creates, I don't know, some kind of charge in a book. Yeah, it's a Gen X list. I'm shamelessly
So
read the same books. I'll do the rest. I'll read those again for the rest of my life as well. I just, can't help it.
I mean, there are writers I read because I just love the way they write, not necessarily the narrative, but the words. Someone like a Capote for me. When you read Capote, it's just delicious. There's just something about, the way he wrote that was so indulgent and beautiful and, very much I see from, I've obviously never met the man, but, from what stories are told about him seems to reflect his character. He was someone who loves that sense of kind of eloquence and indulgence. But, there are some other writers that I think you go through phases and then you kind of leave them for a while and you go back, and it's almost like going back to a different period in your life. It's a strange, a bit like music, right? It's got this kind of nostalgia to it after a while.
I seem to be stuck in like the rough and raw writing style. The gritty stuff is always what's drawn me. And I don't read a whole heap of Australian fiction. I've never read Tim Winton. I think I picked up Cloud Street one time, and it's just not my voice. I don't enjoy that stuff as much. Same with the Australian crime stuff is like I've read The Dry. But the real Aussie noir stuff doesn't hit with me as much. And maybe that's growing up in an internet age where I never really felt geographically tied to Australia. My favourite authors are international voices. And Pissants is, oddly though, it's quite Aussie in a way that, the way they use the C word is quite Aussie. And the humour is very Australian. But yeah, maybe that's me getting it out finally.
I think it's very Australian, but not necessarily ochre, as you were saying. Like, I do think there are many subcultures of Australianness, and it's very hard when you don't sit in perhaps the one that Paul Hogan made famous. Do you read any non-fiction? Is there anything that you're kind of into from a non-fiction perspective?
At the moment, no. Once I kind of switched over to fiction, I'd say 3 or 4 years ago, I haven't read nonfiction except for a couple of friends who've had, their own kind of memoir style books come out. Yeah, I went through a phase where all I read was nonfiction. I think my from probably 23 to 25 or 26, all I read was like socio-cultural books, because I was studying arts at uni and doing sociology, and became very interested in like gender studies, for example. It was the first time I'd really explored the idea of gender studies and what masculine behavior was. So I read a lot of nonfiction on that at the time, a lot of feminist literature too, because to me that was like fracturing open the world in a different way. I think I really went like so far out of my comfort zone and enjoyed it. And now I come back to that world, my comfort world of football and sports, with a renewed perspective, with a more considered perspective. And I think for Pissants to be written, if Pissants was written by somebody who hadn't done that, I think it would be a shit book. I think it would just be a blokey bloke glorification of ha, and it wouldn't be published. But the reality was, like, I know that beneath that stuff is, a lot of fear, and I can explore that as a result. And that has been informed by my nonfiction reading, I guess, but I just don't read that much anymore.
You're obviously drawn, though, to that kind of gonzo idea, that gonzo journalist taking a time and place, a culture. I mean, when I think of those kinds of writers, I think of Joan Didion, or I think of Bourdain, or, like they're the kind of voices, or Eve Babbitt's, those kind of people kind of come up for me. Is there anyone that really inspires you from that kind of inside out, I suppose, view of the...
Didion's essays were, I think you also gave me the White Album. I think you've given me some good books over the years, Keeva.
I didn't buy you all your books, by the way.
Yeah, but I remember Didion's books were two of those books that I read and put it down, was like, wow. And that to me was the first time I'd read nonfiction that wasn't preachy. It wasn't trying to show, here's all these things I've read, here's all these research papers and stats. It was, here's a story, and here's painting a scene, and you will learn more from this scene than you will from me quoting the negative impacts of drug use by researchers at XYZ. It's like, no. Joan Didion will put you in the room with the 4-year-old kid who's tripping on acid because their parents are like, God knows who the parents are. That was a real moment for me. And that I think that helped me get towards fiction, because I was like, oh, story's the real beautiful thing here. Also, you have given me all my books. You gave me Kitchen Confidential. I have your copy of Kitchen Confidential, the 25th anniversary one.
Okay.
Yeah, I need to give that back to you at some point.
No, I've got a new one.
Yeah. I can see it there. Bourdain, David Foster Wallace, even though, there's a lot of bad stuff about David Foster Wallace, his essay writing, that would be the only nonfiction I've read in the past couple of years, is his 2 collections of essays, A Supposedly Fun Thing I'll Never Do Again and Consider the Lobster. There's just a humour to his writing, and I'd say he's a pissant. Like, he has that kind of pissant snarkiness to him that I would laugh out loud by reading his stuff, and it was intelligent as well. Yeah, he was a smart ass. I think that's what I liked about Foster Wallace's essay writing. He's a big smart ass, and that seeps through. There's a very obvious rip-off of David Foster Wallace in Pissants. There's a character called YT, which is yours truly, which is something Foster Wallace used to write all the time. He would be like YT, or he'd call himself Your Correspondence, and I just loved that style, so I tried to rip it a bit. And there's a reason it gets ripped off in the book. There's a little Easter egg later about it, but yeah, he's probably my favorite gonzo style writer.
I do love that the book operates on those different levels. As you say, there's quite a few Easter eggs, and it's not all written from male voices either. There are some female voices that emerge in the book, which I think is also quite fantastic. It's got that kind of sense of balance and almost, the way that women somehow can just kind of almost roll their eyes at the behaviours of certain men. I think you can really feel that in their particular chapters. Leaving writing for a minute, leaving kind of reading and that passion area, and going back to football, and, your relationship with it, I think, has kind of been love, hate at times, hate, love at others. Where do you think you sit with it now? Like, I think I texted you earlier this year at the Swans Hawks game, and you didn't even know it was on.
Yeah, that would be right. It's pretty neutral at the moment. I get asked this all the time, and I would never sit at home and put on Channel 7 and watch a game of footy. I just won't do that. I'd rather watch a movie or a TV show or read a book than watch a game of footy. But I still enjoy watching footy. Like if I'm at the pub and it's on, like I'll like watching it, or I'll talk to my friends about games in the weekend. And I feel like I can dip into that world whenever it suits me. I don't get the fan. I just can't deal with the footy media. That side of it drives me crazy. I can't imagine working in that space and having to. It's such a saturated market now, and I think we get so much drivel as a result. For me, the parts of football that I like are, the games on the weekend. I enjoy watching that as entertainment, and I have a few friends who still play who I'm quite close with, and follow their careers. But I'm not watching a game hoping a certain team wins. I could care less. It's just background noise.
It is interesting, though, because your era is kind of coming to a close, right? The curtains are calling on perhaps the players that were the same age as you, or does that feel like you're kind of disconnecting more from it, or is it?
I mean, when I do watch and I see a kid on screen who's like 18, I'm like, you're so young. Like, it's crazy how young people are when they get into the AFL. And I was like an 18, 19-year-old running around and really just think how much of a baby I was, which, never excuses anything you do or stuff like that, but you're just so immature as a person. I don't think too much about what it's like that my era's done, and that, I don't really have an attachment to that. I think there's an interesting shift culturally, generationally happening as a result of that. I think my generation of players is the Pissants, and I'm sure they still exist, but footy clubs in general, I think, are moving from this kind of tall poppy syndrome and angry dad coaches that we had for so long towards, seems like they're promoting, I mean, Hawthorn does it really well, promoting individualism, and players are being encouraged to have a personality, and we were so media trained for so long and so boring, but now it seems like there's some flair coming back. And I think that is tied to this younger generation of players who've grown up with TikTok, for example, where it's encouraged for you to video yourself and share a dance or something like it. I would never do that on Instagram. And I don't want to be the old guy who's like, back in my day, but it's different now. It is different. And I think in a way, Pissants is kind of like a farewell or an homage to that generation who's now leaving.
It's an interesting observation, because I think when I grew up in the 80s, that was my first experience of watching football. There were a lot of big characters. It was very much a big character kind of game. I think when you look at it now with, more mature glasses, you can see that there was quite a bit of violence in the game. The rules were obviously quite different. It was a very different era. And then I felt it did become quite sanitized. And I don't know if that was to do with media maturity, the awareness of, a rising social media. What changed? Something's obviously changed, where the game all of a sudden took this kind of high ground where it had to become, thankfully less violent. I think I'm pro, less violence, but the actual characters of the game, I felt really toned down, and it was almost dissuaded to be a character of the game. Suddenly the workmanlike professional footballer was praised, whereas certainly in the 80s and early 90s, the characters, in the 70s for sure, even before my time, they were real larrikins.
It was just an almost like a knee-jerk reaction to, I imagine, scandals. A lot of scandals would have happened with players and negative press, and clubs would have jumped on that and gone, well, let's just avoid this. And you get media trained, and players come into the system having only seen media trained people then, so we talk the same as they talk in interviews. Like, interviews then become a regurgitation of stuff you've heard before, and it's why the tropes come out about, just taking 1 week at a time, and if I get my chance, I want to take my opportunity. Like, you say that because you've heard somebody else say it and it's acceptable to say. It's very boring as a result, and I'm glad that now we have Bailey Smith is like, again, I don't watch much of footy, but I know that Bailey Smith's having a good season, and I know that he's quite an interesting character. And some of his stuff is on the field. I'm like, just there's no need to do that. But in interviews, he doesn't do the media trained stuff all the time. There's these glimpses where he'll just be like, I'm not going to say sorry for that. I don't want to say sorry for that. And I think we like when people are genuine. I would much rather get an authentic Bailey Smith than a media trained person who's just dribbling out the same shit. And I'm glad that we're heading back there. I am glad, and I hope the media doesn't just ridicule them and crucify them all for doing that, because then we all lose.
I think it's been a beautifully refreshing thing. Obviously, I'm a Hawthorn supporter. That's where my biases are and my interest
Yeah.
probably is. But we've seen it with GWS recently. We've seen it with the Western Bulldogs. Like, the banter's back. You feel like the cheekiness is back, and it'll be interesting to see how far it can go and where it can go. And I know you've got perhaps different opinions to me about.
I have many thoughts. I mean, it's good. It's because social media at footy clubs was very boring for so long. When I was there, it was like they'll just upload photos from training and that was it, and no one would really engage with it. At some point, they realized that, and the Giants were the first ones to do it. And I spent a week at the Giants shadowing their social media guy, Jacob, because I was fascinated by it and I wanted to write about it. The interesting part is like, yeah, there's a real bantery voice that's there, but this might be my inner cynicism and nihilism about footy clubs. I'm like, yeah, but anytime you see that, something goes off in my head. I'm like, what's beneath the surface? And while the admins and the media managers might just be having a laugh and posting, funny memes and stuff to get traction online, you then know that betting agencies, for example, are like, look at this platform that's grown. They have an engaged audience. We'll give them money as a result, and they can just put out brand placement on stuff. So they can do a TAB segment every week. And I came from the point of being like, I know that happens, and I wanted to know how the social media team felt and the media team felt about that partnership, and they were all really embarrassed about it, or at least they were giving off the vibe to me like they were really embarrassed about that partnership, but that they needed to do it to make money. So it came back to me about football being a business, and I had experienced that as a player. I had experienced what it was like to be chewed up and spit out as a player. And my view was like, well, how is this then affecting the media world? Is this really just banter and fun, or is there actually a business? And of course, there's a business aspect beneath it. They have metrics and data to measure everything, and they can sell that off.
I agree. I think there's a really scary side that we probably need to have deeper conversations about, the way we're molding kids. Even the idea of fantasy football is one I'm not sure I sit 100% comfortably with, just because it is turning the game into something that's less about the sport and more about, winning and odds. And, it is kind of a precursor to gambling, right? Like, you're conditioning young people to think about things divorced of their team, to really think about odds and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I have some concerns there. But on the flip side of that, I see something like, Massimo D'Ambrosio's Nonno on the social media.
Yeah.
And I see culture and I see warmth and I see humanity in a way that, maybe it's not real. Maybe it's all artifice. I'm not sure. But it does kind of make you feel a little bit of warmth for these players in a way that probably I haven't felt for a long time.
Yeah. And I don't want to allow my inner cynicism to let me not enjoy those moments either, because I fully am aware I'm a bloody nihilist and massive cynic when it comes to sports, and I'll be aware that my initial reaction is always going to be like that, and I need to then pull back and be like, well, yeah, there are beautiful moments there that even if there is somebody benefiting from it in some way, it still doesn't mean that moment isn't beautiful or that it can be used in a good way. So yeah, and not everything's so black and white. There's a lot to be blurred and a lot of grey area.
Yeah, I just think it's an interesting shift, because I think it is quite marked at the moment that we've gone from this very, very sanitized, media-controlled environment. Everyone, it's just another game and blah, blah. It's all about the team. And you could literally quote the interviews. And I think, your book parodies that really beautifully, the kind of media interviews that happen. But, it's now all of a sudden you've got these random, sometimes loose, sometimes, perhaps a little bit crossing the line moments, but it's starting to become interesting again, I think, as a viewer, beyond the game itself. And, I personally support a team that's had great success, but there's a lot of teams that haven't for a long time. And I think it's a nice thing for young people to have fandom again, right? To engage in a fun way with people that are perhaps, showing their humanity.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the online stuff has just it's been super geared towards young people, like teenagers. And I don't get half the references that 7 AFL posts anymore. Like, they post these references to things happening online. I'm like, I don't know what song you're talking about or who this is. So, but then you go through the comments and it's just like kids having fun, like kids commenting and going nuts on there. So it's, they've adapted and they've realized that the online world and the online footy fan does want a bit of color. They don't want Nick Rewalt wearing a turtleneck and like getting the same four guys around a panel. Like, stuff's boring as hell.
Poor Nick, but he was never that flamboyant. I mean, he went on MasterChef, didn't he? He did some, he showed us he could
Did
cook or
he?
something. I don't know.
A bag bowl or something.
Yeah, I find him. Yeah, look. One of my biggest bugbears is the commentary of AFL when I'm constantly staring at this, 45 plus white male. Everyone's the same look, the same feel, the same language. 3-piece suits. This has been really bothering me as well. And I love fashion.
And the white sneakers.
The white sneakers.
The 3-piece suits and the white sneakers.
Yeah, someone's got to get in there.
Fox Footy finds a wardrobe and they stick to it. They go like, this is what our presenters wear. And I've seen like the write-ups of what they do, like when they have their wardrobe list. And it's just, I'd love to do an essay on spending a week at like Fox Footy. Like I think that would be fascinating to just watch, just to paint this footy media right now, and to just, when the camera turns off, did they all just sit around and like look at their phones? Do they not talk to? Like, that would be fascinating. But I dare say I won't be granted access anytime soon.
Well, I've sat inside media organisations, and I think certainly there are some books that could be written, but they wouldn't be as warm or as colourful or as endearing as yours, Brandon. I did set you a little bit of homework today. I wanted you to think across what were your kind of 5 pissants. I can't even say the word. This is the problem. I say chance, dance, and now I say pissant, right? It's a unique word for me.
Yeah. Okay, you asked me
You're the Hall of Fame inductor, is that the word? You're the one that's got the decision making. Who are the 5?
Well, this is not like all-time list. I think was too much for me to consider. Liam Gallagher for me is like a pissant, and this contradicts the idea of like the shit kickerdom that comes with pissant. But like, these are people who, when I think of the word pissant, they come to mind. Liam Gallagher, I have, just for, if you go on his Twitter and you just read his stuff, you're like, very clearly he's a pissant. In the light of the incident between Toby Green and Tom Papley, they are both pissants to me. Tom Papley is a out and out pissant, and so is Toby Green. Then I don't know if you'll know these ones, but Nathan Fielder is like an American comedian who does the show called The Rehearsal, and he is a genius to me he does the Foster Wallace thing, but in a TV sense, where he manufactures situations to get a story out of them. And essentially, I just think he is, because he fabricates things and stirs the pot so much. Then I had Nathan Fielder, and that was it. I only had Toby Green and Tom Papley kind of count as one, so I only had 3. I don't know who else I'd add to that list. It was a big task. My all-time favorite pissants. It kind of threw me into a spiral. Who would you put on par?
For me, I guess if I had to pick a football pissant that I just love to death, it would be Brian Lake. He's someone who probably not on the fringe, right? But maybe has had some struggles, and certainly has, just finds joy in moments that I love. And, when he was driving around the Gatorade thing after the grand final, and I don't know, that screamed pissant to me in terms of who he is.
I don't know, every now and then I have like this, I see stuff on my Instagram and I'm like, should I start doing like a pissant of the week or something? But I just don't want to do that.
You don't want to be the pissant guy forever. Is that what you're
saying? No,
I
don't. I wrote the book, and if other people want to take it on and, they want to turn pissants into a thing, then go for it. But my duty and my role was in creating the book. Yeah.
One thing I was thinking about with your recent post this week about Book Week and schools and certainly pissant-styled costumes, I was wondering, Brandon, and obviously the language would need to change just a touch, but have you thought about writing children's books?
Yeah, hell yeah. I have an idea for like a Pissants Juniors, but based around Squidman. I think Squidman is a character that most easily becomes a children's book character. The Adventures of Little Squidman would be hilarious to write.
I would love for you to do children's book. Thank you so much for joining us on Culture Snap. I've absolutely loved the book. I'll be putting up links to it. I do feel like you're kind of unpaid marketing person, by the way.
Yeah, you've done a lot for me.
Turns out I filled up your entire library, and thank you so much for chatting with me today, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Keeva. It was a joy to be here.